There's never this like story we tell ourselves about, well, I'm doing really well. And you know what? So is that person. It's always a negative comparison or a negative story. And I think that's part of that, unfortunately, self-doubt.
Before we dive in, it's important to remember that the information we provide is for informational purposes only. Every situation is unique, and decisions regarding your health or legal matters should be made after consulting with your own doctor or lawyer. Our aim is to inform and empower, but personal circumstances require personalized advice. Hi, welcome to another edition of Justice in Scrubs. I'm attorney Richard Hastings, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Dr. Jeff Michaelis.
And we have a very interesting guest joining us today in Emily Fritz, who is a licensed clinical social worker and is a behavioral therapist. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So you could talk about 100 different subjects, but we want to talk about a couple just to limit it so you can have more time to discuss certain things. So I guess we should start with you give us a little bit about your background and what caused you to engage and be gravitated to this type of work.
Oh, okay. So I've been a social worker for over 20 years. I think what kind of drew me to that was just seeing the need to help other people, and where I grew up and what my kind of family dynamics were kind of lended itself to being a helper for me, and really feel that people can maximize their potential. And I like to see that. I like to see the results of that.
So for people that might not know this, there is a psychiatrist who is a medical doctor.
Correct.
And can prescribe medication.
Yes.
There is a psychologist who is not a medical doctor and cannot prescribe medication. And then there is an LCWS. SW, sorry, my dyslexia.
Me too.
So there's a licensed clinical social worker. And all of you in some way, shape, or form can be mental health professionals and or therapists.
Correct. Yes.
And generally, you can all work on the same different challenges that come into your office.
Yes. Absolutely. And we can utilize each other for the specialties that each one of us has to kind of shift patients in between if they need to.
And in your practice, do you have a specialization?
The majority of the patients that I see where I'm located are more of a senior population. So I would say definitely more geriatric and a lot of grief management.
And with the geriatric population, what are the major reasons people come in?
Loneliness, anxiety, worry, fears, concerns about their family, a lot of family dynamic issues that weren't resolved that they're looking to process.
And now we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is something that I have the pleasure of carrying around with me every day, ADHD.
Yay!
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Exactly, right?
Wait, there's a butterfly.
Squirrel, where's the squirrel?
So why don't you tell us a little bit about ADHD?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting the way you kind of started that. I think the majority of people have symptoms of all sorts of things, and attention deficit disorder is pretty prevalent. And lately, in the last 9 years, being out in the primary care office, we see it constantly. People coming in, all different ages, mostly adults where we are, saying, I'm just really struggling focusing, or I can't seem to get these tasks accomplished, or my wife is really unhappy with me because I've started a million things and I haven't finished them. So
husbands never say that, just the wives?
So I think it could present differently for different people. But the majority of the folks that I end up with are the men that come in and are really feeling other symptoms related to their attention deficit disorder. They feel anxiety, they feel low mood, they feel insecure, they don't understand why they can't complete things. They've been given a lot of negative feedback over the years and, oh, you're lazy or you're just procrastinating, all sorts of labels that are not positive, where there's actually, I think, very wonderful things that come from those brains, and we can accomplish numerous tasks and a lot of times at the same time, and it can be extremely successful. And if we didn't have that, we might, I think, otherwise not be.
And I think if you're relatively successful and you have ADHD, you tend to surround yourself with the people that are the executioners, the people that can execute on ideas. And the ADHD people are the big idea people.
Right.
And they have all these different things and they put them up on the board and on the wall and they talk about different things and you give everyone a headache in the office and then someone says, okay, I'm going to take this task and somebody else is going to take that task. So in the general population, are more men than women have ADHD, or is it?
I think more men are diagnosed. I think more little boys are diagnosed with that when perhaps they might not have it, or they could utilize it in a more positive way versus, oh, that little guy never sits still, or he's always acting out or causing disruption. We'll see a lot of new moms sometimes coming in, like very concerned about their little boys. And I remember a colleague said to me, because fell victim to that myself, and just give him a minute, like, give them a chance to kind of adjust. We all have these traits, and they might be able to be used in a more positive way versus medication or kind of pigeonholing somebody into a diagnosis.
And I think it's interesting if you go to these parent-teacher things where you show up at school, and generally speaking, especially at the younger levels, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, it's the boys that are acting out. It's the boys that are moving all around. And the girls are sitting there. The girls are paying attention. And if you ever watch any of those videos online where people are doing incredibly stupid things, like the jackass type things, 99% of the time, they're boys. They're guys. Yeah. And very rarely do you see girls riding their bicycles into, briar patches or jumping off the roof and I don't understand what that's all about. I don't know that it's ADHD so much as maybe testosterone or whatever it is. But it's interesting to see the great disparity in bad and reckless behavior.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. And I think sometimes maybe the way we view genders comes into play with that.
What does that mean?
Well, when the way we kind of encourage boys to be a little bit more active perhaps, or, risk takers, and maybe we're telling them, oh, well, don't be afraid of that. Why can't you do that? I think there's some things that we've grown up with, which hopefully now we're starting to kind of have a broader view of, that might have lent it to that.
And I think from my generation, the biggest difference in raising children was it was perfectly acceptable to smack your son. Not that I smack my kids. I'm saying my father smacking me. But if you had a daughter, you wouldn't smack your daughter.
Right. So there's a difference, right? There's a difference in the way that you're parenting, perhaps, that might have also caused some of that difference in behavior.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that especially in school, my son had very difficulties with ADD. And the school wants them to be in a box, right? And they want everybody to look alike, walk alike, talk alike. And they're all different. And maybe you can talk to us how you help parents deal with some kids that are a little hyperactive. And we don't want to throw medication at them all the time.
Correct.
And there are like strategies that you can help.
Yeah.
And maybe you want to talk through that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things is to recognize the beauties in that brain versus the negative things that maybe come out in other ways, and to really encourage them that you're there to support and to help. And we love to talk about the Big Five as a way of behaviorally managing our attention deficit disorder. So I can review that a little bit with you.
That'd be great.
Yeah?
I'd like to write them down.
Yeah.
You
See,
sure
I
they're
usually
only
take
five?
notes for you.
Bring it on.
Here we go. So first and foremost is hydration, right? Water is extremely important. It Cheers.
You need a double.
Wow.
Exactly, right?
I wish I had known this years ago.
So simple. And protein, we need to make sure that we're feeding that brain, that we're giving it enough nutrients so that it can be at its optimal potential. Sleep is another very important big five, so that if you don't get enough good rest, it makes it even more difficult to focus and pay attention and to accomplish things. Exercise, really, really great, very, very helpful, especially cardiovascular exercise, even if it's short, quick bursts of energy that need to be released. So when, children come home from school, let's not immediately make them sit again, right? Let's let them run around. Let's give them an activity break, a snack, something protein related, ensure that they've had good hydration, and let them play. And then maybe you bring them in to do some sort of task that seems challenging for them, right? And then last, which I think we all need in today's day and age with how quickly and fast our society moves and the million pop-ups that happen and the alarms and the bells and everything that goes off all the time, you need calendars, you need lists, you need reminders. You need to figure out which things work for you so that you don't miss appointments or you're not late to things or you accomplish a task in a certain time period, right? So we really focus on those 5 things for everybody, children, adults, adolescents. Whenever we get a patient that says, I'm having trouble concentrating, I think I have attention deficit disorder. Well, I think the majority of us have traits of it. And I think the way we have to function in society lends us to having that. So we have to figure out, how do you navigate it?
Can you talk a little more about sleep? Because
Sure.
my son, if he doesn't sleep well, the next day is a disaster. And he just takes more pills. So can you talk about strategies to help these kids or teens?
Absolutely. So I think in order to get good sleep, we have to kind of plan for it. And we need to make sure that we've done something active enough during the day to not just but physically make us tired, as well as, mentally, emotionally. We need to kind of feel like, okay, I really need to rest. Right? So if we're coming home and we've sat at school all day and perhaps we're now playing video games or we're sitting again, the body's not really going to be super tired and ready to go to sleep, right? So the exercise piece is really key so that you get some of that out, right? And then setting up time for sleep, having a sleep hygiene routine. I know everybody says, but I kind of play on my phone until I fall asleep, or I got to watch that show before I can go to sleep. Okay, let's work on just dialing it back slightly, right? They say at least 30 minutes before bed, you don't want to have a screen flashing because it's going to continue to disrupt you when you try to sleep. So if you can set up just 30 minutes, right? We don't want to try to take everything out of the picture immediately. Right, 30 minutes. In that 30 minutes, we're going to do some mindfulness exercises. We're going to stretch, right? Maybe we don't stretch every day. And flexibility is key, right? So trying to have your teenager or if your adult son, whomever, do some light stretching. Just relax your limbs, right? And then I also like to tell people to use some lotion. I know some, children and boys might be like, what? But it's important to kind of just massage your limbs too so that they feel comforted. So you've stretched them, you've exercised them, you're relaxing them. It also relaxes your brain a bit, right? Listening maybe to some light music while you're doing that, breathing. We give out a lot of mindfulness breathing exercises that really calm the body down. And one that we love is the Center for Mind, Body, and Medicine. And there's a soft belly breathing exercise on there that if you really practice it repeatedly, a couple times a day, it's amazing how calm the body gets as well as the brain. And for folks with attention deficit disorder, with a bit of anxiety, we're never really that still, We're constantly moving either in our head or physically.
Can you repeat that? What was that called?
It's called the Center for Mind, Body, and Medicine.
Center for Mind, Body, and Medicine.
Yep.
Is there a website or something?
You just plug cmbm.org, and you go to the self-care page at the bottom of the home screen. You click it. It opens up self-care practices and soft belly breathing, and you listen to Dr. James Gordon, and it's about 7 minutes long, and it teaches you how to breathe so that your body relaxes as well as your brain.
So I was meditating with Buddhist monks, and they teach you these repetitive hand gestures that you do. And for me, being so hyper, it amazed me that it brought me way, way down.
Yeah.
And then one of the other things I do when I go to bed at night is I put on these YouTube videos. I don't watch the video. It's just the sound
listen.
On whether it's green noise or whether it's some meditative, kind of hypnotic thing. And I find it very, very helpful in kind of, I doze off to that. And then it's got, whether it's the brain waves or whether it's, some type of music that I find very, very helpful.
It's soothing, right?
Right.
And sometimes the repetitiveness of the noise you attach to, and it just relaxes you, almost like when we would be rocked as a child, right? And just kind of that repetitiveness is comforting.
Now, you also talked about sometimes it's not a good time to do homework.
Yes.
Or sometimes it's not a good time to do whatever. And can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, I think we have to be mindful that everyone kind of gets through their day differently, right? So a parent of a child with attention deficit disorder might not recall or remember what it was like to be in school, but you could kind of associate it to working too, right? At the end of your work day, you should do something. There should be a transitional period, just like at the end of a school day. You've been kind of managed, or people try, right, to keep you to keep you in this little space and focused on the things they want you to focus on for however many hours, right? Whether you like it, some of it you don't. So at the end, you need a transition period. So that could be some meditation, some breathing exercises. For kids, it could be play. Right? We always have our sports after school, but if you're not in an organized sport, you still maybe need some time to just release that energy that's been contained. So giving children a break when they get off the bus to do whatever it is that they feel they would like to do physically.
But not video games. Or what do you think about that?
I think they need to have a burst of energy. I think they need to have some outlet before they're again sitting and just narrowly focusing on something. The video game might be great for someone with attention deficit disorder because it gets their brain going in lots of different directions, right? And it feels good, which is a good thing. But I think we're missing then the component of the big five where you got to have the exercise. And that helps then with the sleep. So if we don't have some kind of an outlet to move our body, it's not going to be as tired as the rest of you.
Well, sometimes they have video games where you actually participate.
Perfect. Like the Wii, I think it used to be called,
They
right?
still have
Where
that?
I so don't know. I'm not a big
Well, you
technology.
used to play the Wii with your son, right? Didn't you?
Well, it's funny because we got this for Christmas, this Wii game.
Yeah.
And my son and I are playing like tennis.
That's always what I
think of. And all of a sudden I go to do a backhand and it comes out of my hand and puts a hole in the wall.
End of that.
I thought, this isn't a good idea. So let's talk about another thing that I think you see a lot more of today than you might have years ago, and that's anxiety. And why do you think we're seeing more anxiety, if in fact we are?
I think we're exposed to constant information and stimulation. And for some, that can be good. There's definitely different personalities with attention deficit disorder that can also have anxiety attached to it. Mm-hmm. And just the amount of input we get. You can't get through the day without hearing something about something that's not a positive thing. Whether it's a pop-up on your phone that you didn't really want, or it's something in the mail that came that's, alarming that you didn't know about, or you have the news playing and your child walks by and catches a glimpse of something or hears something that's happening someplace else that's frightening, right? There's just constant input. So I think that keeps us on this little bit of a high alert, and there's more hypervigilance. There's more awareness of things, where even when I grew up, so many years ago, you didn't have all of that. So you could kind of live in this little happy oblivion maybe, right? But now all this input comes into play and people don't ignore it. We expose ourselves to constant stimulation. There's no off button. Somebody, really can't, I don't really want to be on social media, but everyone else is, so I got it, but I don't really look at it. Or I just do it to keep in touch with family, but something else came through. And now you're feeling it.
I saw a program that was given by a professor at Harvard, and she was talking about social media and how it adds to anxiety. And she said if you ever go on Facebook, people are going on the nicest vacations. They're eating at the nicest restaurants. They're going to the best concerts. They're doing all these amazing things. And then you look at that and you think to yourself, I'm less than, or I'm not experiencing things. And she says, I like to put things on my Facebook page like, oh, my daughter just found out she has head lice. So it kind of lifts people up. When they read this, they're thinking, oh my God.
I'm so much better off.
Right, my kid just has dirty hair. They don't have head lice. But when you look at that constantly, and it's almost like a fake reality.
Correct.
That people, and then we all have friends that every time where they've eaten every single day, every single meal. It's like, and then they're saying, I want to try to lose some weight. It's like, what the hell? If I ate the food that you're eating every day,
that'd be a problem.
Right.
That is so true. I remember when it first came out, and I don't do any technology or social media. It's just not my thing. But one of my very first patients that had been exposed to it was exactly the issue. She already had some mood instability, already had some insecurities, and then she started doing Facebook. And every week was a new catastrophe.
Sure.
Because look what they're doing and I don't do this. There's something else wrong with me. And it's just progressed and magnified so much. And for kids and teenagers and adolescents, that's a hard thing to regulate because they still care what other people think about them.
Maybe you should start a movement where every Thursday people only can post disastrous stuff. Like going into the psych ward today after my nervous breakdown.
Right? I know, because we don't see all of that. We only see the highlights.
Because who posts the nasty stuff and all the horrible stuff?
Exactly. You have the news for that.
I think that'd be a great idea. Every Thursday,
so
you just type, you put in negative stuff, and everyone can look at it and say, "Oh, I'm not that
and then
bad."
They'll have a happy weekend,
right? And unfortunately, I think that's part of the challenge we have with anxiety. Is, for me, comparison is the bane of unhappiness. It's like if you compare yourself to somebody else, you can be less than in so many ways.
Sure.
So why are we always comparing their car, the house, the clothes, the watch, the vacation, the food? It goes on and on. Yeah. And then in a place like Ridgefield, when I was a kid, we played Little League Baseball in Ridgefield. Now you have travel teams that are going to Pennsylvania or North
Disney.
Carolina or Disney or, it's like, what?
Bigger and better.
When did
and
this
more.
get so out of control?
Yeah.
And kids are going to camps. And they have SAT coaches. And if you're not getting into one of the best colleges, it's like.
Yeah. The competition is phenomenal. Yeah. And all of that is like a pressure cooker, right? And how do you limit that exposure for your kids, for yourself, and also manage your anxiety? Well, let's use that piece. Like you said, no Thursdays, all this. But maybe it's no Thursday FaceTime or Facebook or whatever, right? Maybe you put a block on how much exposure you'll have. For some of my patients, it was leading up to yesterday, there was a lot of stress, right? So
yesterday being the election.
Correct. So limit your exposure, check in on whichever news program is your favorite, maybe only once a day for a half an hour. Like you don't need to be inundated with the same report over and over again the entire day. right? If you need some sort of noise stimulation because of your brain, maybe you put on some music so that there's something else happening, but it's not negative input.
And you know, the way they sell advertising space in newspapers and publications, on TV, on radio, is by having horrible news.
Right.
And if you read horrible news, it's like, you know, it's like turning away from a train wreck. If you know there's going to be a train wreck, you have to keep your eyes on it because you're like, oh my God, this is horrible. And I'm like, why am I watching this?
Right.
And it's the same thing with this news. This, you know, very rarely do you see these happy, you know, kind of stories about things.
Exactly. And that's what we try to help our patients to also see when you're making a comparison about yourself and someone else, even if it's not coming in from social media. Maybe it's just you're at work and you're struggling and you see your other coworker doing fantastic and you start to compare yourself. We never make a positive comparison. It's always negative. There's never this like story we tell ourselves about, well, I'm doing really well. And you know what? So is that person. It's always a negative comparison or a negative story. And I think that's part of that, unfortunately, self-doubt, right? Like you were talking about the hypnotherapist and that she kind of retrains us to think, well, you know, I can shoot a better, you know, golf score than I did. Or versus this is as good as it gets. Right? There's this limit that we have.
We wanted to take a quick break to remind you about our sponsor, findagreatattorney.com. Dealing with the aftermath of an accident or injury can be overwhelming. And the last thing you want to worry about is finding the right lawyer. Findagreatattorney.com simplifies the process by connecting you with one of the top attorneys in your area who specializes in your specific type of case. Whether you've been injured in a car accident, suffered a slip and fall, or experienced medical malpractice, findagreatattorney.com has a network of experienced lawyers ready to help. And remember, their service is completely free, so you can focus on your recovery without worrying about the cost of legal representation. If you or someone you know needs legal assistance, don't hesitate to visit findagreatattorney.com and let them match you with one of the best lawyers in your area for your needs.
Yeah, you want to talk about other strategies that you do for parents that have kids that are struggling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I have a book I brought with me.
You're not going to read from it, are you?
No, because I, you know,
is it your
possess
book?
This, so I haven't really finished the whole thing, right? Because that's another challenge for us
So
folks.
I usually start, like I go through the table of contents and then I look at the chapters that interest me and I start there.
Exactly. Right? We can kind of keep track on a handful.
You guys are like twins.
It's, which helps, you know, when patients come to me with these things, it helps.
They just jump right into the end of it and you start, oh yeah, I know what you're saying. I feel you.
I can totally relate.
I
can empathize, right. So Driven to Distraction is a really great book because, well, first of all, for us folks that struggle with that, right, there's stories. There's little clips of people's lives. It helps the person with the attention deficit disorder to recognize, like, hey, I'm not the only person that has these challenges. And they're not all bad. It doesn't have to be viewed as a limiting factor in your great potential, right? But also it helps parents because a lot of times we'll hear from parents, I'm so frustrated. She's just sitting there and she hasn't finished her breakfast and the bus is coming and now she's late and I got to drive her to school. Or why didn't you just hit submit? You did the whole assignment and you didn't hit submit and now you have an F.
Or you did your homework and you didn't bring it to school.
Right. Exactly. And it's like for parents, it's just like, I just don't understand. Well, let's read this.
Can you show the camera that? Yeah.
Let's think about the impact of our reaction on them.
It's also sometimes is better. Sometimes during the day is better. Like if they come home and you say, you got to do your homework, go to your room, do your homework, it's just not going to happen.
Not happening.
And then maybe an hour later, it's going to happen. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, kind of just like when you come home and you want to tell your spouse all about your day and they might be doing something. But for some of us, interrupting people when they're busy is another symptom. So, hey, I can't wait to tell you this. Blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, my gosh.
So timing is very important.
Right. Is it a good time to talk? Is now a good time?
And the other thing I find curious is that we always attach negative labels to these things. So
Right.
one of my daughters is a board-certified behavioral analyst. And they used to say that these kids had learning disabilities, LD. And now they say they learn differently, which is so true because all of us do learn differently.
Absolutely.
Like if I were to pick up that book, like I said, I wouldn't start at the beginning. I would jump all around the book. And that's not to say that it's better or worse.
Correct.
It's just how I process information.
Exactly. And I think we have to recognize that and ask people. Like when you have a new employee, how do you like to learn? You know, I have this all in paper or I have this online. What works best for you?
Also, some people are more visual. Some people are more
Completely.
audio.
Yep.
Like, I can't read a book anymore, but I can do the audio thing, and I can really concentrate on that. So they have these apps now that turns any book into audio.
Perfect.
And that kind of stuff.
Perfect. And the dictation devices.
Oh, yeah.
Like I think sometimes children with this or with symptoms of attention deficit disorder or anxiety struggle to sit still and write. Right.
And conversely, to your point, I can't listen to audiobooks. Like I'll be in the car listening to an audiobook, and then all of a sudden like a car will come out and I'll look at the car and I'm like, oh my God, what was that guy thinking? He almost hit me. And then I start thinking about where I'm going and what I'm doing and what I'm having for dinner and what I did yesterday. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I haven't listened to this for like 3 minutes.
I got to hit rewind.
Right. It's like I got to go back to the part that I remember.
Right. Everybody's different.
Exactly.
And that's part of your struggle, right? To give
Right.
people
There's not just
strategy.
one way of doing things, right? But with the big five, you can take those things and adapt them, right? Hydration, okay, water, right? Some people like water with ice, some don't. Some don't like the taste of it, so maybe you got to put a little fruit in it, a little lime or lemon or orange, right? You got to adapt it a bit so that you do it. Exercise could mean a lot of things. It doesn't mean you have to play an organized sport or you have to go to a gym. You could put music on and move around your house for 20 minutes and don't stop, right? Like whatever's going to work for you. Same with sleep. We're not going to rip that TV out of your bedroom if that's something that really, for some reason, relaxes you, but we're going to ask you to give like a 20-minute window, whatever's possible for you.
Why don't they? Because this all makes so much sense. And parents, generally speaking, don't know this. So why wouldn't they have a class that they would teach this to parents? Like, you know, especially if I think one way and my child thinks a completely different way, it would be very frustrating trying to get them on the same page because we will never be on the same page. We'll be in the same book, but on completely different pages.
Well, I think part of the challenge is we label the kid, right? So you ask the school, okay, they're not doing well. Can you evaluate them? Well, what's going on? And
what's wrong with them?
Right. And then they might give you a diagnosis. Most of the times they don't, right? And they say, well, we'll put this in place and this in place and this in place. So they have a plan for while they're there, but then they don't tell you anything. And you go home and you keep doing business as usual and you keep clashing and nothing is making sense, right? So I think the parent, if the child receives some sort of plan or diagnosis, the professional who's doing that should also then say to the parent, now let me help you figure out how you're going to cope with that.
So maybe when you go to parent-teacher conference, the teacher should be giving skill lessons to the parents.
Or hand out something to them to say, hey, this is what works for us here. Maybe you can do some of this at home too, and recognize this isn't like a deficiency or a negative thing about your kid. It's just something you have to work with.
So as we're sitting here, I've come up with a quick fix for this. And I don't understand why they don't do this. But you could almost do like a Myers-Briggs test for young kids. And then based upon the Myers-Briggs showing how they learn, whether they're auditory or they're kinesthetic or visual, whatever it is, they could have a report that they could give to the parent that says, this is how this child of yours learns. Right. And it doesn't mean that your first child and second child and third child all learn the same way, but this particular child learns this way. And then here's some suggestions.
Exactly. Can you talk about this? I never heard of this.
So lots of big corporations have the Myers-Briggs test that they give to new employees.
Right.
And there's another one called DISC, D-I-S-C. And it basically says what type of, how you process information, how you interact with people, how you learn. And based upon that, you put them in a position where they can thrive based upon how they operate.
Right. It makes a lot of sense, right? And we can either ask people or we can do those tests, but then you have to use the information in a wider loop, I think.
And I don't even know that you could ask people, how do you learn? It's like, what are you talking about? But if you gave them the test...
Yeah, you get more specifics.
And they do that in corporations. So why wouldn't you do that at a very early age? Because my understanding is once you take Myers-Briggs, that's who you are. It's not like you start to learn differently, although you could. But this is the way you think, you process information, you learn.
So you can just get that online or something? And it's free or something?
I'm sure you could Google.
Right.
And get a printout of it. Yeah.
Don't take one now. It's too late for you.
Yeah. We're past that.
No, I remember.
Don't peel back that onion.
I remember when I was in medical school, I had so much trouble studying because I couldn't sit for very long. And then I finally figured out if I just read the paragraph twice, I skim it really quickly, and then I go back and read it again, I was able to... It stuck.
Yeah.
And that little thing changed me.
Yeah.
And it made medical school so much easier.
So there's another technique that I hadn't learned until I was out of law school, and that is the Cornell method of note-taking. Are you familiar with that?
I was just going to say not specifically that, but the only way I can pay attention or learn is I have to write everything down.
Right. So the Cornell method of note-taking is you have a 1-inch margin on the left side and then a 2-inch margin on the bottom. So when you're taking notes, you write within the margins, and then at the end, you write down the most important parts of the lines, and at the bottom of the page, you write down the most important part on the page. So you've written it down 3 times.
Yeah, that they do that now with the kids in school, because my daughter has to, when she's reading a book, have sticky notes, and they have to write down their notes and stick them all over. Yeah.
And for me, when I do big projects, I mean, you should see my office. There's sticky notes. It's like the mind map.
Exactly.
You know, this mind map thing where you have the thing in the middle and then all these branches and things. And I mean, that to me is like, I look at it and I'm like, it's beautiful. I'm working on that today.
Yeah, and for visual learners too. You know, so sometimes I write in all different directions, but nobody else will ever interpret it.
Oh my God, I do the same thing.
But it makes sense to me, and I can visually remember exactly which part of the page I wrote their family history on compared to when they were hospitalized. Or
do you doodle too while you're doing it? And I do the same thing where someone says, what happened in the accident? There's a page with all this scribbling on it. I'll be like, it happened on this day at this time, and this is what happened. They're like, where did you get that?
What is that?
It's like I wrote it over here.
Yep. Because it sticks, it imprints, right? So I think recognizing those beautiful things about our brains, instead of calling it, it's just this disorder or it's this negativity.
Right.
Like, figure out a way to work with it, right, to your advantage.
Right. I can give you an example. My son in junior high school, what are they called, middle school now?
Yeah.
Was failing. He was failing out of middle school, which is difficult to do. And he just couldn't do it. And then we put him in a different school, and he ended up getting 800 on the SATs. So he's obviously a bright kid, but he was in the wrong place. And he wasn't getting the help that he needed. And it wasn't only medication, it was strategies.
And that's the piece that we keep trying to have folks understand when they come in and they want this evaluation for attention deficit disorder. You can tell sometimes when somebody might not really be looking for the strategies and is just looking for the medication. So we try to educate them at those times to see that this isn't just going to fix that by swallowing this.
Right.
Like, you've got to put some other kind of work into this to help yourself.
Can you talk about when you have to go to medication versus you think, like if you see a patient and you're going to say to yourself, maybe this person, strategy only. Then the next person is strategy plus medication. How do you know when they need the medication?
I feel like if someone has truly implemented numerous times these strategies and they're failing, they get so close, they get most of it done, but then that last part still isn't working, right? And you mentioned earlier about different jobs and somebody can delegate the things that are more challenging to them, right? So they're delegating that, their work, they're successful, but then at home, more responsibilities are falling on them and they can't quite navigate it all, right?
The to-do list.
It just keeps growing. I recently had a patient that I've known for years on and off, and we've managed the anxiety component of his symptoms, and he came back again and he says, listen, my job is great. I can delegate now, so I'm doing much better, but I have a little kid growing and all of a sudden there's more stuff happening and I can't seem to get it all done, and I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing this. That could be an opportunity where, okay, let's trial something. Let's talk to your primary care physician. Let's see just a little bit if this could help.
Can you also talk about, you don't always need a psychiatrist, how you work with the primary care physicians and how you work in the primary care office?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have at Nuvance integrated care in the primary care offices. So there's a licensed behavioral clinical social worker in all of our primary care offices. So we work with the PCPs. We do the full psychiatric evaluations and screening tools. We give the information. We help with behavioral changes to improve health behaviors. And then we work with the primary care doctors who've been managing the majority of these things by themselves for years, right, to support them so that if they do prescribe a medication, which most of the medications for these disorders are prescribed by primary care doctors, we can monitor that for them. And we can monitor the patient, and we can put in all those other strategies and report back to say, hey, this med's working, but there's still these symptoms. I don't know, maybe discussing an adjustment, right? So that the patient gets all the care they need in one location without feeling labeled, because unfortunately our society still labels people. There's still stigma out there. No matter what, I don't know that will ever completely disappear.
I think people, when they go to a doctor, want you to say you have ABC or you have XYZ, because then they can leave and say,
the reason?
Oh, I want to look that up. I want to Google that. So you can talk with the person and then figure out what's going on with them, right?
Right.
So what's wrong with him?
That's an old story.
Oh, he's one of my favorites.
So let's talk about so we've talked about coping mechanisms. We've talked about medicines. What about holistic things that are kind of thinking outside of the box? What could you do with that? For the treatment of ADD or for ADD. Anxiety or any of these?
Well, I think, again, some of the big five is holistic, right? It's really what you're putting into your body and what you're getting out of it. So making sure that you're eating well, that you're drinking good fluids, that you're sleeping well, that you're exercising, right? And that you're really looking at what you need to accomplish and what you want to accomplish. I think all of that is key. Holistic, besides that, are you talking like maybe supplements or vitamins and things like that? Mm-hmm. I think, making sure that you even need them in the first place, right? Like we should always double check that our blood work, our vitamin levels, go see your doctor first, right? And then there's a lot of different holistic approaches. Yoga. Yoga is another excellent strategy for some people. Mm-hmm. But for some folks with ADHD, they can't get through a yoga class. It's too still. So maybe Pilates is a little bit better, right? So just trying to work with whatever the patient needs and their personality too. Because ADHD can look different in different people.
And I think, you touched on, it's not really one of the five other than you said protein, but your diet. And there are lots and lots and lots of things that you can eat or drink that are not good for you.
Correct. The more sugars that we put in, sometimes that's not helpful. Caffeine can help some of us, but not others. So, yeah, absolutely. You got to kind of pay attention to that. Because a lot of folks with attention deficit disorder will load up on caffeine so they can function, right? And they could still sleep regardless. But for some, it might be too much stimulation too.
So do you have, for example, with the fluids, should you drink your body weight in ounces?
I think it's half of your body weight in ounces is what they say.
What about protein?
For protein, I think you're supposed to be somewhere between like 60 and 80
Yeah, that's about right, yeah.
grams of protein a day. Yeah.
Yeah, also exercise. Like my son can't just ride a bike outside. Or
No.
what he can do is he always needs to be distracted.
Correct.
So he loves this exercise in the house, and then he has to have a screen in front of him, and he has to follow his up some hill or something. And it can't just be like...
It's got to be multiple stimulation.
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
totally get that.
And it works for him. And
Yeah.
he tells me, I said, I have no idea what he's talking about. And I don't understand it, but it works for him.
But it works.
And
Yeah.
like when he does work, he works at home a lot, he has to have some other stimulation.
Yep.
So he has to either watch a podcast, hopefully
ear.
hours, or something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And if I did that, I wouldn't be able to get anything done.
Right.
So everybody's
so different. Yeah.
So when I work at home, I will put on the television, I'll have the radio on, and I'll have a fan on.
And there you
Because
go.
otherwise, it's like I
See,
don't have enough stuff
it's
going
the
on.
multiple levels, right?
Yeah.
I can stay on a treadmill if I'm listening to music, watching a show,
And juggling.
daydreaming. And it's like, okay, this is enough. Like 4 stimuli and I'm good.
Right.
Somebody says, you want to go for a walk? No.
Right. Because
Is it in traffic? Are there-
Right? New York City, I love driving in New York City. I could have been a cabbie.
right. I couldn't handle that at all. I mean, so everybody's totally different.
Everyone's totally
And
different.
you have to find it.
Correct.
Right?
And you have to figure out what works. So instead of looking at that brain as disordered and we're going to put you on medication and we have to keep you contained so you can focus, that might not be the right fix for somebody. You have to ask them, so when do you feel the best? When does your brain really thrive? And it might be, well, when I'm doing something I like and when I have multiple other stimulus going on, I can really hone in on it. Okay, great. So this is what we're going to do.
And then finding out when you're most productive. I mean, I'm most productive very early in the morning.
I know
And-
he calls me every morning. I was like,
So
half
I'm at the
asleep.
gym at 3:30 in the morning just to
get
show
up
you
at
how.
4, yeah.
So we call that the afternoon crowd. So we go to the gym at 3:30, and then I'm just go.
Going.
And when I get to the office, I want to get all my work done because when I'm in the afternoon, I'm just kind of like, I don't even want to be here.
Yeah. So how does that sometimes impact your relationships too, right? Because sometimes attention deficit disorder can impact our relationships.
Right.
People have to adjust a bit.
So I think, for me, my girlfriend is very similar. Like we go to the gym at 3:30 in the morning.
Excellent.
So if I ever went away on vacation with another couple that got up at 11 o'clock, that just wouldn't work.
Wouldn't work.
And
Exactly.
and like people will call me, they'll say, "Why don't we go out to dinner? That'd be great." I made reservations at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock
I'm in bed.
at night.
Exactly, right? So knowing and kind of accepting the differences.
And I think my big takeaway from what you're saying here, especially for parents, is that everyone is different.
And it's okay.
Yes.
It doesn't mean there's something wrong with them.
And you have to, as a parent, it's not that you get the child to do what you want them to do. You have to accept that they do things the way they do and support them in that.
Right, and that they can still accomplish it that way, right? And that, I think, is the hard piece. And I'm not downing parents. I'm a parent. I get it. I think we ourselves can be overstimulated and also have some of these similar issues going on, and we might have a different version of attention deficit disorder or a different personality of that than our kid.
I always do this too a lot. What is that anyway? It's emphasis.
It's emphasis, exactly.
And
yeah.
some people work better at night, right?
Some people are excellent at night. Others can't.
Right.
Right? So it's just kind of recognizing it and allowing them to do it in the way that works for them without feeling like you've got to make them sit and do it now.
And some of the difficulties of people that do better at night is school. School starts so early.
Right, and then the sleep becomes a factor.
Right.
So there has to be some kind of compromise for them. Like, okay, how much sleep do you really need to function, right? Because, yes, we'd love everybody to get between 6 and 8, but some people don't necessarily need 6 to 8. And I think we have to look at that a little bit too and recognize that works for them.
And then at the high school in Richfield, they start so early and they have so many kids that the first group has lunch at like 10:15.
Oh, really?
Holy smokes.
I mean, what do you do
early.
after you eat lunch at 10:15?
Yeah.
And also, I wonder how successful they are in first period. Some kids, first period just doesn't work.
Doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
interesting.
That's why they wait till college and they kind of pick and choose their own courses.
Yeah.
Right.
Or they start to drink
Or maybe
caffeine.
they should have gym in first period for some
get
kids.
some movement.
Yeah. Interesting.
So as our time is growing to a close, I'd like to give you an opportunity to kind of synopsize what we're talking about. What are some, great takeaways that you could give to a parent or to a business person or to anyone that just wants to know, how do I deal with my potential ADHD? Or
Right.
how do you deal with anxiety? Or what are some of
Right.
the things that I can do to make my life a little bit better?
So I think one of the biggest things is to embrace your brain, however it functions and whatever way it works for you, and also for those who love and support you to recognize that, and that it's not always a negative, that you can be very successful with anxiety, with attention deficit disorder. It's all a matter of how you use it and how other people accept that, right? So really encouraging some acceptance, and when you need the support, getting it. Like, okay, this is my brain and I love it, but I need a little help making it work a little bit better for me. And then knowing that that's okay to ask for help.
And if somebody wanted to see you, do they have to go to their primary doctor and get referred to you, or can they contact you directly? How does that work?
Yeah. So in order to see any of myself or the team, you have to have a primary care doctor in the network, and the PCP refers you over, and we're right there to help.
And where is your office, and what is it called?
So it's Nuvance Primary Care, and I'm specifically in the Southbury location, and I have a team of 15 spread out throughout the Connecticut and New York.
Wow. Emily Fritz, thank you very much.
Thank you. This was great.